When we're talking about transitioning individuals from, or even diverting individuals from institutions, what type of institutions are we talking about? I think we mentioned a little bit ago, we talked about nursing homes. Of course, nursing homes is the more prevalent institution that we're talking about. And we mentioned something about ICFs. So when we think of long-term, and not even long-term care institutions, but when we think of any type of institution, what type of institutions are we talking about? And I'm just curious as to what type of institutions can you all come up with? Hospitals? Sorry? Jails?
Jail diversion.
Okay. Mental health facilities?
Homeless shelters.
Oh, I had the homeless shelters. I hadn't thought about that one. Any others? And let me just say, a lot of times people think of institutions as just long-term care institutions. Well, it's those short-term care institutions that will get you transferred to long-term care institutions. So it really behooves us to know what those institutions are and how we can utilize our services and do the outreach that we need to do in order to divert individuals from going into those types of institutions. So any other institutions we're talking about? Yes, ma'am. Exactly. He's bringing, I'm sorry, if you could repeat that again. Sorry about that.
Rehabs, chemical dependency, individuals that have been in a rehab for 3 months to a year, and then they're coming out with nowhere to go.
Right.
And they need a place to go to.
Mm-hmm.
The family homes, youth trying to grow up out of their homes and having their parents hold them back.
Yes. Sometimes people say institutions are, where you're residing, don't want to be, and have to pay for it in many respects. But then that would cover a whole lot of places, wouldn't it?
Domestic violence and homeless shelters.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that she mentioned over here were the homeless shelters. Okay, any more?
Foster care.
Foster care. Group homes, which are, in some instances, I think we've kind of said ICFs, or intermediate care facilities. Okay. Well, it looks like we've pretty much, yes, ma'am.
Residential care facilities.
Mm-hmm. One thing I haven't heard pretty much maybe your assisted living facilities. Some people, depending on what pot of money you use to get individuals to live in the community, some people might think that your assisted living facilities are institutions simply because people are placed there because it's just the next best thing out of a nursing home. So, and I'm going to cover just a few of those, and I don't have half of those on here, but I'm going to cover a few of those. Basically, was it someone else? Oh, okay. Basically, types of institutions, nursing homes. Our homes, not nursing homes. How many have heard that mantra? Pretty much. And it has become the rallying mantra of disability rights advocates throughout the nation. It is often in demonstration to the institutional bias that guarantees services for eligible individuals entering nursing homes or other institutions while requiring waivers for community-based services. And I think we've heard here probably several times during the day, institutional bias. How many of you all have a community where the nursing homes have a waiting list? Raise your hands up high. That's because there is that bias that exists that they can go into a nursing home at any time whereas you have tens of thousands of individuals on waiver waiting lists. That's the institutional bias that we're talking about. So, and in Texas, we have what we call the Home by Choice program, and that is our transition program in Texas, and we're funded basically under Medicaid with that program. So we had a contract with what we called at the time, which is dissolved here at the end of August, with the Department of Aging and Disability Services. And most of those contractors are centers for independent living. I think we have one AAA, Area Agent on Aging, that has those contracts. But in order to be eligible for that program, that you have to be Medicaid eligible. And so we, as contractors in Texas, we are pretty much in the nursing homes. That right there is our primary institution that we deal with, are the nursing homes. And what you will find is that the nursing homes, they have Medicare beds, they have Medicaid beds, they take private pay. So just about anyone when you're talking about the nursing homes. Nursing homes provide 24-hour care to a cross-disability population that includes younger and older adults. Now, what does that sound like? That's the very population that we as centers serve. So we're in those homes, and those are the individuals that are affected by the long-term care in nursing homes. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services says that 4 out of 10 individuals who reach age 65 will enter a nursing home at some point in their lives, 10% of which will reside there for 5 years or more. I don't know about you, but to me, that is just, I mean, that's mind-blowing to me, especially with 65 being the new 40 for the most part. And not only that, you know, more and more young people are going into nursing facilities. Like with our Home by Choice program, what we've learned, and we have to submit like an annual report to the Department of Aging and Disability Services every year. And I will tell you about 35–40% of our individuals are individuals under the age of 60. Now, the majority of those that we're transitioning over the age of 60, but I just think that's astonishing when you have that many young people in a long-term care facility or in a nursing home. Diversion and transition programs may thwart these trends, enabling more individuals to live in their own homes and community safely, independently, and comfortably, regardless of age, income, or ability. So essentially, we're talking about aging in place. How many of you all have heard the term aging in place? What does that mean to you? Not a rhetorical question. I'm curious as to what does that mean to you, actually. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
You can you hear me? Yes. Mm-hmm. That a person can stay in the home of their choice throughout their life process. So whatever age they are, whatever disability they acquire, they can stay comfortably in the home of their choice and not have to move around. They can stay there forever.
Right. And a lot of times you hear the aging in place, that terminology, when you're talking about housing. How many of you are familiar with universal housing? Right, and that's mainly where that term is used when it comes to aging in place. But I would say the same thing about any type of services that we could provide in order to help that individual maintain their stay in the community. We mentioned ICFs. Well, in Texas, they call them CILs, state-supported living centers. And I will tell you, when they changed the name to CILs, the director of our CILC, not to be confused with the statewide independent living councils, but she was livid. She was livid because they were going around calling the support state living centers or the state schools CILCs. So let's make sure we don't make that mix up. Despite the national trend of deinstitutionalization, over 40 years ago, Texas continues to operate SSLCs, I'm not going to call them CILCs, formerly known as state schools. And there are other states that are also operating these type of facilities. These intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual disabilities are Medicaid funding. In Texas, I don't know about, other states pretty much, but this is where the operating costs exceed their admissions. So there's nothing to be gained there as far as funding. The SSLCs have been plagued with egregious acts of neglect and abuse, resulting in a $112 million settlement by the state of Texas with the U.S. Department of Justice. And I would imagine that a lot of states who operate like state schools have heard, I don't know what planet you live on if you haven't heard, some of the egregious acts that go on in the state schools. And so, I'm sorry, sir? And that's what I was getting into. The Texas legislators have moved to restructure the SSLCs, going so far as to consider closing up to 5 of the 13 facilities we have in Texas. They have not been successful with that. And why do you all think that that's the case, for the most part? Sorry?
Been there, done that. Money. If it's a regular ICF or Silk, it's got a 16-bed hall, and there's probably 3 or 4 per the property area. If you have 64, 48 beds, and you got all your beds full, that's pretty much cash, and that's property taxes for the county. That's money that small businesses getting money off the food you have to eat and the laundry you have to do and the staff who work there. So when you close down those ICFs, I have to go someplace. I've been here now for 19 years. Where am I going to go, Michelle? Oh, a group home, David. Okay, where's my group home? Well, it's way over there. New people, new friends, new things. My family goes, Michelle, he's lived there for 21 years. He can't move now. That's his home. That's my home. And in many instances, I've lived in that silk for 20 plus years. I'm going to leave my home. So there's pressure on politics, pressure on money, pressure on small business. So yeah. And your state, like my state, Illinois, has no spine.
No spine.
Okay, I feel like they didn't, I think you were asking about why haven't they shut them down out of the 5 to 13? Because we're talking and communicating with our state representatives in our communities. That's what we're doing in the Houston area. I'm in Houston, by the way, Sugar Land.
Where about? Okay. And basically, a lot of that has to do with of course, strong parent lobby, because that's the thing, where are they going to go? The other part, when it comes to legislators, pretty much is that it affects the local economy because the state schools have a lot of employees. And where are those employees going to go? So that's part of keeping, the ICFs open. But they have moved to restructure them. But I will say that, that's part of the reason why a lot of the state schools have not been closed down, because there's really not a whole lot of economic value. I mean, the states aren't really getting any money out of that.
Michelle?
Yes.
Bruce. So like in upstate New York and Rochester, so very different state, but the same kind of problem. It was the clinicians, so the social workers in the local developmental center that held a press conference as part of their union at the Locust Club, the police Locust Club, with a line of police officers behind them saying that the release of these disabled individuals from these settings would, well, first they started, the individuals in these settings are dangerous criminals, sex offenders, and have other behavioral issues, which is murderers, rapists, and people who pick their nose. Generally, three things that don't get put together. But the image of those social workers saying that these people are dangerous, you don't want them in your neighborhood with the police behind them, was a very powerful image. And basically they called out the governor's plan as dangerous. So sometimes I know that we want to all sing Kumbaya and link arms, but sometimes the unions in these facilities, it's not just the concern by legislators over lost jobs that's reinforced by some of the unions. And disturbingly, this is an affiliate of SEIU. They wouldn't actually come out and tell their local to stop the crap. That they just let that carry on. So it is a very powerful force against closing these places.
It is. Yes, I agree. The other institution that was mentioned are hospitals. Acute care physicians often discharge individuals from hospitals to nursing homes due to the need for ongoing nursing care, longer recovery times, rehabilitation, or because of multiple readmissions for chronic medical conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, stroke, and mental illness. How many of you work with your ADRCs or your Aging and Disability Resource Centers? Well, good. And I do know that there was a push because one of our centers, the center that's located there in San Angelo, actually received ADRC funding. And so they were making a big push to have individuals go to the hospitals. And of course, you're giving your information and collaborating with the doctors and the physicians or whoever the administrators are in the hospitals, that when you get ready to discharge someone, to give the center a call. Because a lot of the times, if they have no family, if you have repeated admissions, that doctor is going to recommend that you go into a nursing home. And we do know that once they get a hold of you, they don't want to let you go because you become what? A part of their census count. So, I think if you have the capacity to make sure that your local hospitals have your information so that they can call you and so that we can put other services in place. Rehabilitation centers, and this is something that Darrel was just hitting on, are individuals with newly acquired disabilities may be discharged into a nursing facility because the individual inability to perform in activities of daily living, or having an inaccessible home to go back to. This is all new to them. And so to be able to get into the rehabilitation centers is a plus. You're going to be dealing with parents that, they don't know this is something new to them, plus the individual doesn't know what to expect. I will tell you, I know when I was in rehab, I can remember this guy coming in a wheelchair. I can remember him having black boots on. And I can remember him saying, call me when you get out, for the most part. And he was telling me about, the center and everything. But of course, at that time, the Demerol was the main thing. But I remembered it when I got out. I thought I had remembered the name. And so when I finished up with living in the dorms, I wanted to move back, to Amarillo, which is my hometown. And I was needing help finding accessible housing. And I can remember the name almost sounded like Passels or something. And I was looking up the name, and I came up with something close to it, and it was Paso. Well, I gave Paso a call. And they say, well, we're the HIV organization. I said, no, I don't think that was the organization. And they say, oh, you must be talking about Passels. Well, Passels had, changed his name because it was so close to that name. But I remembered close enough, and believe it or not, just that one call set me on a course. And that's the reason why I say that, when you guys go into the home, you can change a person's life forever. You can divert them from going into a nursing home and spending 25 years to life, or you can give them that piece of information that's going to change their lives forever. So I would say developing partnerships with these institutions to implement diversion from the outset can positively impact the course of a person's life. Correctional facilities. We talked about the correctional facilities. How many in here actually work with your correctional facilities to divert or to transition people? Do you mind sharing that with us?
One of my staff, one of my independent living specialists, has a close working relationship with the Idaho Department of Corrections. We recognize very thoroughly that the social workers who work in the prison system do not prepare these convicts for reassimilation back into the community. And that speaks to the high recidivism rates that we see, because they're simply, you know, it all boils down to housing. If you have an F by your name, they say right on the outset, don't even apply if you're a felon. So again, it's, you know, the housing question always comes into play, and I think for ex-felons and people who are transitioning out of a correctional institution, we know that they're ill-prepared to reassimilate, and we know that when they don't have a safe and stable place to live, their propensity for reoffending is very high. The independent living plan is based on a continuum of maybe a transitional place where they live for a short time, they get a job, but that only lasts for so long. Again, when there's so much bigotry and bias against felons, both occupationally from an employment standpoint, from a housing standpoint, I mean, a lot of times these guys come, and these men and women come out of the joint and they go right back in. If there are people with disabilities especially, I mean, again, we deal with a prison system that is wrought with shortcomings. From gladiator school settings to people not getting medication properly. Essentially, the Idaho Department of Corrections is the largest mental health facility in the state. But I can assure you the doctors and the people who work there are not the best and the brightest. And that's very kind of backhanded and cynical. But the systems advocacy we do out there, as we know, a good advocate is not always welcome, wanted, or liked. Bob Michaels tells us this. And they certainly, when they see us coming, you can just see the hair stand up on the back of their neck, because they view us as being interlopers who have no place in corrections. But again, these are people who harbor the very same bigotry and bias that they engender this attitude that we're trying to change as civil rights activists at CILs. So again, it seems like people with disabilities who come out of the Idaho Department of Corrections really have the deck stacked against them. I mean, it's one of those things where even if there were a ton of housing, if they're felons, a lot of people won't rent to them. But again, I guess, you know, our point in the CILs is we're trying to systemically change that. Our presence there in this spirit of partnership is one where we're really kind of trying to shift that balance, and hopefully they'll start to recognize us as allies. But then again, we're talking about census counts and things like this, and we find that these people, the folks who work in IDOC, I'm not sure if they're champions of the people who are transitioning out of the joint. In fact, it's almost like they're happy when they get re-adjudicated. So.
And I know that as a CIL, we work with more with trying to keep individuals from going into, you know, the correctional facilities. We haven't done so much work with individuals or helping them to make that transition from a correctional facility. So that's the reason I asked you what, you know.
But I mean, we know
Mike,
again, because the mental
Mike.
Use the mic.
There we go.
We know because, again, Idaho's a mental health crisis. We get outspent by Puerto Rico for what we spend on each individual with a mental health disability, for example. So keeping, I mean, you know, and we're constantly at the mayor's office and constantly working with the Boise Police Department, for example, because less than a third of the police officers on that force have any kind of mental health training or TBI training or anything like this. So again, it's almost, you either send them to a state hospital in Blackfoot or Fino, or when they are felonious, they get sent to the Correctional Institute. So keeping people from going into the joint is far more difficult than helping them transition out. Because again, you can't control the actions of individuals, and the system, we feel is set up against them, and it's just easier to put them in corrections than it is to actually spend money on them to help them find a place to live and to treat them that way. So, but again, we live in a state that eschews Medicaid oftentimes. The political leaders in Idaho view it as a socialist plot for shiftless people with disabilities to steal from the government. So this attitude is pervasive politically, and it's pervasive in the police force, I feel, and it's certainly pervasive in institutions that encourage violence against one another as inmates. And that is a real thing in Idaho. It just happened. And the lion's share of the people who were involved in that were people with intellectual disabilities and mental health disabilities.
Right.
So.
And NAMI says that, which brings me to my next point, that an estimated 25 to 40% of individuals with mental illness will be incarcerated at some point, in their lives. So,
I just want to address the issue about felons. There's a huge issue that HUD has addressed by putting out a letter of guidance to folks that are in the housing industry, in that they have policies set up to say if you're a felon, if you have a record, you are going to be denied housing. And so HUD has put out a guidance recently to address that issue, because not every situation is the same. And so there's guidance out there for those that are advocating for people needing housing that are felons, that may help them gain housing if by contacting your fair housing unit in your state. They should have that guidance. Not all felonies are equal, but because agencies that provide housing have these blanket policies that say, if you're a felon, you don't live here, but there are differences. And what has happened is it's creating a disparate impact on certain ethnic groups by having such blanket policies, and that's why they are addressing it. So just because you're here, you're a felon, you don't have housing here, don't let it go. Follow through with a fair housing agency.
So we have the issue too where if someone's coming out of the penitentiary, we know the Section 8 list has been closed. We know that any city subsidized housing is closed. So when we're talking about in the now, a place to live, that is the issue. HUD can address that all they want. But really big picture, when we are so strapped, and not only is the Section 8 list closed, we're losing Section 8 providers. Right. So even if you do, I think that in Boise today they're serving people who applied for Section 8 in 2014, March of 2014. So when someone's coming out of the penitentiary, there's no specialized program in our community that's promoted by the Department of Corrections to assure that people have transitional housing to assure success. They're basically thrown right back into the meat grinder, as it were, with parole officers and things like this. That it just seems almost there's a systemic bias that they want them to reoffend. They certainly don't give them the tools that they need in order to live successfully in the community, and that which they give them is pretty limited. The Department of Corrections can't force someone to give a felon a place to live, and HUD's not even involved at this point. HUD's out the window for a lot of the people in my community because it's simply not an option. So we're talking about people who are just trying to look on Craigslist, find an apartment, and go apply, And then if it's not the felony question, then oftentimes it's, well, you have to have 2 or 3 times the income to rent here. So we know that if you're on SSI, you're immediately housing vulnerable. If you're on SSDI, even making $1,200 a month, affordable housing in Boise, Idaho is about $600 to $700 per month. We also know, we promote this idea that employment is the next step on our continuum. We want to work. People with disabilities want to work, so let them. So if you're a felon trying to get a job, again, there's that issue. And they say a lot of times, as this gal over here suggested, not all felonies are the same, but there's a lot of, we're not supposed to do a lot of things that happen, and the law is only as strong as those people who enforce the law. So if it's not one barrier, it's another. If it's not that one, it's going to be another, and that's kind of the crux. We know the employment rate or workforce participation rate for these people is so far out of whack, it's not even funny. So everything that we suggest to them on the continuum that they should do in order to stay out of jail, it's really just kind of lip service at one point. And we know it's up to the individual to make those changes in their life, but even when they want to do that, oftentimes we hear from these folks that it's practically hopeless, right?
Sorry, I have the mic. My name is Andrea Austin for Rochester. And, before the HUD guidelines came out, if anybody had any type of felony, even if it happened in 1970, you couldn't get an apartment. But I have a success story I just have to share, because we were working with this guy in a nursing home, been there for years, and he committed a felony in the mid-70s, and he committed another one in the early 80s. He served his time. Luck was never on his side. Actually, when he was in jail, that's when he got his physical disability. Then, years in a nursing home. Then with these HUD guidelines, that's basically he was being discriminated against because the fact he committed crimes when he was a young man. So what we did, we just advocated with the landlords, told them about the HUD guidelines, because they don't always know about it. So we told them about it. I'm like, yeah, he committed a felony back in 1975 or whenever. He's an older gentleman. He needs some services to be independent. We found him a place. We worked with the Rochester Housing Authority, and September 1st, hopefully September 1st, maybe if everything gets together, hopefully he'll be wheeling himself into his brand new apartment after years and years and years of being in a nursing home.
Right.
So.
That's good.
My name is Stephanie King. I'm also from Rochester, New York, and I also have 2 stories, but these are not long stories. I was working with this one guy who also committed a murder. Well, I don't know what he did, but the guy that I was working with committed a murder. But I was working with his parole officer along with the social worker, and the parole officer was also the advocate who would kind of go in and say, listen, let me go in and explain to the landlords the situation, because then they will look at me and would say, okay, we're getting it from his point of view, so we could give this person an opportunity to let just by him going in alone. So with working with the social worker and working with the parole officer, it turned out to be a success. And then there was another one who called in who also was looking for housing. He had a certain amount of time to get out. But I didn't work with him very long because it was sort of like an on-call thing. And I mentioned the parole officer, and he said, well, yes, I do have one. And he does work with me. I said, well, then you know what? Go to him, push it a little bit more, and then tell me how the outcome goes. So, and I said, if I don't hear from you, then I know that outcome turned out good. So he said, okay. And I haven't heard from him. So I'm assuming that outcome turned out good.
And just to follow up on that, it takes a village. I mean, it takes centers building those relationships out in the community. And I always say with the relocation specialists, my personal favorites, to be quite honest with you. They are a jack of all trades. I mean, they know their resources inside out. And that's what we as CILs do, though. I mean, it's absolutely imperative. If we can't provide a lot of these services, we know where to go and get these services. So, I mean, that's a great story. A great story. Okay, yes.
Oh, now I have a mic. Okay. I just had a couple of suggestions. A couple of times things have come up. When I first took this job 15 years ago, one of the first calls I got was from a man who had done his time but had not been released because they could not find accessible housing for him. And I said, how long has it been? And he told me 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. And I just remember being floored that he was still in prison even though he didn't need to be because they didn't know of any accessible housing for him. So that kind of stuff is still out there. I'm sure it is, especially in Alabama. But I had one guy who was turned down for housing on the basis of a criminal background, and he actually petitioned. He went to the house, he asked for the appeal hearing, went to the hearing, spoke on his own behalf, and said, I'm not the same person I used to be. And he won the appeal, and they put him on the waiting list for housing. So, and then I had, a couple of months ago, I had a woman who was a social work student, bless her heart, who called me and said she was looking for housing for this one woman who was coming out of jail, and that the judge wouldn't allow her to leave until she had located housing. And I worked with one of the organizations nearby that helps people who are reentry, who are nonviolent offenders. And they said, well, we can take her, but we can't take her until she's been allowed to leave prison. We can get her housing, but she has to leave prison first. And I said, well, the problem with that is that she can't leave prison until she has a place to go. Well, we can't take her until, she's out of prison. Well, the housing can't, it was just, years ago I had one guy who I couldn't move out of the nursing home because he didn't need to be there, which was the most ridiculous one I've ever. He had improved to the point that he no longer required nursing home level services, and that was the requirement for getting community services. So the fact that he didn't need to be in the nursing home was the reason that I couldn't move him out. Mm-hmm. So.
And we'll probably get those stories quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. There is some hope. Every once in a while you can find somebody who's willing to. I mean, after I went around and around and around with the people who said he has to be out before he can have housing, but he has to have housing before he can be out, we finally did work it out. So it is possible, but you gotta think outside the box, because really in what we're doing there is no box.
Right. I'm getting a 15-minute warning here, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. But thanks for sharing all your stories. Much like the cost of nursing homes, the incarceration of individuals with mental illness costs more than twice the amount it takes to serve them in the community. So that's really no secret. That's something we already know about institutionalization. Diversion projects implemented by court-ordered outpatient treatment programs are proven to be somewhat effective, but those are still controversial too. And just listening to some of your stories, working with probation officers, the local mental health authority, the Social Security Administration, and other community-based organizations, CILs can play an effective role in diverting individuals with mental and emotional disabilities from correctional facilities. And I didn't realize just how many, are working with the correctional facility, but I'm glad to hear those stories. So, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think as folks are coming out of jails and prisons and such, seeing Michelle's numbers, about 25 to 40% of those individuals are with mental illness and such in there. I think it's really important for people to really know what their disability is and to know how that manifests itself in their lives. And I say this because in the work that we do in the high schools, high school students many times don't understand their disability, and they don't understand how it manifests itself in life after high school. So I'm thinking the same is probably true for folks coming out of jails and prisons and institutions that way. That, you know, they're coming out and maybe they don't understand. Maybe they've been in for a while and some of the old stigmas and teachings when they went in are still, you know, there with them. And so I'm thinking that it would be important then for us to help them understand what their disability is and how it manifests itself, as well as getting the housing that's much needed.
Okay. I would say question and answers, but we're going to skip this part and move on to what it means to be at risk. What does it mean for a person to be at risk of entering an institution, and how can that be avoided? And I think this has been touched on a couple of times this morning, but some believe that having a significant disability alone makes a person at risk of institutional placement. Some believe that the consumer's self-identification alone may be enough to consider a person at risk. Others believe, and this is myself included, that self-identification and having a significant disability are key components, but other factors or a combination thereof may present a more comprehensive picture of what at-risk is. So, common at-risk factors. Thank you. Common at-risk factors. We're talking about homelessness, chronic medical conditions, substance abuse, issues with taking medications, living alone, age, lack of assistance with activities of daily living, little to no income at all, or no family support. Now, not just one of these factors alone will get you placed, in an institution. It's a combination of those at-risk factors that may lead to you losing or you being placed into an institutional setting. So, say for instance, if someone comes in, they're homeless, they lack, assistance, or they're in a wheelchair living in their car. Say they have a decubitus or a pressure sore or something. That puts you at risk, wouldn't you say? So, can any of you all think of any other at-risk factors for the most part? So, okay. Jessica?
I actually have a question. I wonder, would domestic violence be considered an at-risk?
I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's one.
Okay, there you go. And I know that we devised a at-risk questionnaire to help us with this, and we just had an annual training where we went over, some of our forms and some of our processes, and there were a couple of things we decided to add to our at-risk assessment, and abuse is one of those. If that person has disclosed any type of physical, mental abuse, or something along those lines. So in the other one, we decided to pretty much add was it depends on how that person was referred to you. If that person was referred through maybe Adult Protective Services because they're looking at taking guardianship in order, to keep them from going into a nursing home, or with them taking guardianship and actually putting them, in a nursing home. So those are two at-risk factors that we're looking at adding to our at-risk survey. So no matter the approach, CILs may take in assessing risk, the ultimate goal is to divert consumers from institutional settings by utilizing the core auxiliary services that CILs already provide. And we've talked about these core services: information and referral, individual and systems advocacy, independent living skills training, peer support and counseling, and youth in nursing home and other institutional, transition. We also talked about the auxiliary services, such as personal attendant services, Tenant-based rental assistance. Are you all familiar with tenant-based rental assistance services? And some of those that provide transition services or relocation services also have grants from the home program with HUD that you can, and it's like a 2-year bridge, I think, to be able to give a person rental assistance. Utility assistance. Some centers might have a comprehensive energy assistance programs where they can help individuals. Social Security representative payee services. I know that with us, some of the individuals, I'm sorry. There you go. I'm not good at this, as you can tell. Thank you for sitting here for me. The Social Security representative payee services, I know that the entity that would make the determination as to whether or not individuals could relocate under our contract, they would say, well, this person can't get out, because they have problems or a history managing their money. Well, we're not going to let that be an excuse. So we became a representative, payee to Social Security beneficiaries. Assistive technology, home modifications, purchasing durable medical equipment, and vehicle modifications. Thank you, sir. You can go. The CIL does not have to directly provide the services in order to assist the consumer in addressing his or her needs. A well-developed, independent living plan will help to establish the role that the CIL will play in identifying, referring, or arranging services to meet the needs of the consumer. The key to assisting individuals in avoiding non-community living is knowing when, what, where, and how to access these resources. And pretty much like all of the speakers before me said, we are already doing that. So I'm done with 3 minutes to spare, mind you.